Hi everyone, thank you for joining me. I am Heather with Rose Hill Paper Cottage, and this is part 2 of where I'm creating these journal covers from old quilts. And I'm really loving how they're turning out. So I did add that little crocheted piece, which is a part of this other crocheted piece, to that top corner there over the denim, just to add a little bit of interest. And I really like how that turned out. Wasn't sure how it was going to be, but I really like it. So as we take a look inside, what I've done is I've just created 2 panels. So you'll see with this ticking fabric, I added some file folder to the back, and then I just added some, what I would call decorative stitching. It's not something that you have to do. It's just something that I did for a little bit of interest and texture, which you really can't see on camera, but you can in person. Then I added a little bit more of that green fabric on that pocket because remember I had cut into the back of it to remove some of the batting, and so it had the slits, and I didn't want anything, as the pocket was being used with things being slid in and out, I didn't want them to catch, so that'll prevent that from happening. And then I made this cute little, a panel here. Oh my gosh, I just love it. So I backed it with a little bit of a Maggie Holmes paper. I don't know what collection it is. And added lace to the front. But before I added the lace to the front, I stitched on this cute little pocket from, another part of the quilt. And I just couldn't be happy with it. I think it's so cute. So that side's a little bit more flexible. Overall, they're both like a lot more flexible than the other journal, which I'll explain as I look into that one. But basically what I need to do is I need to glue these down and then stitch the whole thing, and I'll, take you through that process. I don't know exactly what I'll do with the spine yet, so I'm treating this as if I'm going to do a hidden spine. I'm kind of leaning though more towards letting the binding show. So we'll just kind of see. I just haven't decided, but I am treating it as if it's going to be a hidden spine. And so that's why I kind of separated it here, and I'll just treat that individually. It doesn't really matter, as far as, technique goes. I mean, you can do it a bazillion different ways. So we'll just see. So here's the second one. And this one's a little bit more firmer because when I did the panels, I actually used scrapbook paper that I backed onto a file folder, so a little bit more stability. But I kind of want to show you like the inside a bit. So I took this old nightgown. It's from like Famous Bar, really super thin material. You can really use any kind of material. You don't even have to do this part at all if you don't want to. I wanted there to be a little bit of more fabric, in between for the layers. And so I just, cut this piece. I actually just used a glue stick to adhere it on, and then just kind of pressed it. And then you can see that I've stitched all the way around it. And I'll do that same technique with the other journal. So I'm just showing you this. So it's really super cute. I really, really like how it turned out. So this panel here is just some scrapbook paper. I believe that's Maggie Holmes as well. And then I just created that tag on the front, added a little bit more of that crocheted trim. And I think I've stitched that already down. Yes, I've stitched it to the fabric. So I just glue it, and you can just see how kind of flexible it is. And after I've glued it and sewn it, I will kind of just, make it a little bit more flexible so everything just lays nice. And then this side is really, I just love this pattern. I just use a little bit of the Elsie's quilt. I use the backing of it. You can kind of see the glue, because as it's still drying, kind of seeping through. I just used it for the backing on this other side. And then I created some of the pocket there with a part of the quilt. And I wanted to keep her name in there. So I thought that was really cute. So there's Elsie there, which nobody will see. Then I just added a little bit of, trim at the bottom there. So I was kind of toying with the idea of using this fabric with this lace because I really liked it. I thought it was really fun. It has the pink and the green, so it just kind of really ties the whole entire cover together. And it really goes good with the front. However, you're going to see me pull another piece out, and I might change my mind. I don't know. We'll see. So I just might use that for the inside spine. It's decorative more than anything. And because I created 2 panels again, instead of doing one solid panel. A lot of times when you do one solid panel, especially if you're working with a thicker quilt, it will kind of bunch up, and I don't like the way that that lays sometimes. So here's this other color. So I'm creating, the spine like as a separate piece. It just helps things to lay a little bit flatter. So I'm kind of digging that. So I don't know. I might change my mind and just do that one instead. So we'll see. Who knows? I'm just making it up as I go, just whatever looks good. So on the back of this quilt, there was that like plum grapey color, and I decided to go ahead and cover it. I didn't really incorporate any of that color within the journal itself. And even though I like it, I like the color, I just felt like having this green here just looks really, really good. So what I did was I tore this off of, the other quilt, and I've glued it down, and then now I'm stitching it. And when I do this, I stitch a little bit over onto the other color. So not the plum, but the other color next to it. And then that way, none of that plum will show through. If you don't mind the plum showing through, obviously you can do it how you want to do it. And there will be a little bit of the plum showing on the other side where I've got the hand stitching, but I think that looks kind of cool. So, just do it how you want. But this is the technique that I use when I definitely want to make sure to cover up completely the color underneath, and then to make it look a little bit more uniform, like it was always there with the quilt. I'm kind of making it look like I'm repairing it, like it got tore and I'm repairing it, as opposed to, covering up something. So I just have just a straight stitch there. And once I do that hand stitching on top, it'll look really good, but I still need to do another step. So I'm showing how I've just smeared a little bit of glue, just a real light thin layer. I use the Beacons glue, but you can use anything, any kind of tacky glue or whatever works. That's for fabric. And I just did a light little smear there to like hold all the fabric down for when I go to hand stitch it. It just helps to keep everything in place as you hand stitch, and it won't shift, on you. So I'm going to mimic those same lines when I'm hand stitching, and I want them imperfect. I want them to match, to make it look like the original person who did the hand stitching on it did this. And so I'm using the same technique that I showed in the first video. I'll just kind of like go in and out, not trying to be perfect, don't want it to be perfect. And sometimes going through all the layers, sometimes just kind of going through the top layers. It just depends on kind of where my needle went, really. There's no rules. You can, do it how you want to do it, basically. So I think it's going to look really cute and make it really unified. And like I'm fixing it, as opposed to, well, this part looks like it's original, but then the bottom part, when you see me do the hand stitching at the edge, you'll see that it looks more like I'm repairing it, I'm fixing it. Back when they probably would have done something like that when they didn't have the sewing machines, or, they couldn't afford a sewing machine, so they did everything by hand. So I want it to look more authentic like that. Oh, and I got a comment about doing voiceovers and why I do the voiceovers, or that I, shouldn't do the voiceovers or something like that. And the reason I do the voiceovers, I couldn't reply to the comment because I don't know if you removed it or whatever, but I couldn't reply to it because it disappears when I go to do that, and I can't even actually see the whole comment. But hopefully I can answer it here. So the reason I do voiceovers, well, is because that's easier for me. That's more convenient for me. My office is right next to my husband's, and he is on the phone with, customers, and we don't need to hear his conversations. Those are completely confidential and private. And likewise, he doesn't need to hear, me do my voiceover or, talking through my video while I'm creating. And then, that hinders him doing his job. So I do voiceovers after. But the other reason that I do voiceovers is because this is how I create. I don't just sit down and do these projects. I'll do like a little snippet at a time, and then I go and I do other things. I do this as a full-time job, and this is not the only thing I create and make. And so I have several different projects going on at the same time. So I hope that, helps to answer why I do the voiceovers. That works for me. And these are free videos, and well, it's my channel. So I'm doing it the way it works for me. So I hope you can understand that. But that is why I do voiceovers. They just work better for me. And you don't hear all those background noises. I can go to a different part of the house, and I can do this when it's, quiet, and you don't have to hear all that other background stuff. So I'm just finishing up doing the hand stitching, the straight lines, and then I'll go into doing it around the edge. I won't do the bottom because that's going to get captured in when I stitch around the whole entire quilt, but you could. I mean, you can, whatever looks good to you, you could do that. And I think like that looks pretty good. I mean, that looks like the original person, did that by me just, being imperfect about it. And then do you see how I kind of ran my stitch up? I just think that's really charming. I think that's really cute. So what I decided to do was I just pulled out a little bit of the stitching, maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 inches, enough to really like kind of cover over the green to make it look like it still was all one piece. I hope that makes sense. Like it just looks more cohesive that way. Like it was, already that way, as opposed to me kind of piecing over different things. And then I'll just back stitch at the beginning and the end. And I just do, kind of like a stitch and follow the lace. And then I'll have to use my seam ripper a little bit because it, from the technique of me telling you from the first video, I usually leave my piece a little bit longer that I'm stitching on to make it easier. And then I'll trim away. So that gives me something to grab. Well, this case, I've already trimmed it. So I had to use the seam ripper a little bit. And the seam ripper can really help as long as you don't get it under that needle. You're good to use that. So it's a really good tool to kind of slide in there. Or using like an awl or something, just something that's like thin. But look how cute this looks. And looking at it, the green really makes that floral pop on top now. Isn't that interesting? It's kind of crazy what color can do sometimes. But having the plum there, I don't know, it didn't really make it pop. But now with that green, it's really bringing out the green in the leaves. So I really love how it turned out. So now I'm going to glue my panels down. So what I do, just to kind of make it easy, is I'll just glue one edge. So whether you choose the side, the top, the bottom, whatever you choose, I just put a little bit of glue there. Then I'll add glue to the entire back side. And then I'll, get them laid flat and measure and make sure pretty much relatively that the width of the spine area between the 2 panels is the same from top to bottom. There's some wiggle room. It doesn't have to be perfect. These are journals, the way that, it closes and everything like that. But I try to get it relatively straight with the same amount of spine, width, from the top and the bottom. Now, when I glue, I don't go all the way to the edge because I'm going to be stitching it on 3. I think, do I do this on 3 sides? I think this one I only actually do 2 sides because I fold that pocket over. So, but the front one with the flower on it, that's going to be stitched around 3 sides. Now you could stitch around all sides. If you want your stitching to go through where the spine is to the other side of the quilt, you could totally stitch there too. I opted not to do that. I may do it later when I add the spine part. So we'll just see. And I definitely don't want double stitching there. So, just because I think it'll kind of hinder the overall look of the quilt. But I would say, if you're going to do something like this, trying it out or trying it out on scraps to see if you like that of the quilt that you're working on, if there's a scrap piece. Otherwise, you'll just have to rip it out. I had to do that with the other quilt. I'll explain that in a second. Sometimes you just have to rip your stitches out. It's just, it doesn't always work perfect for me. And I have been sewing for a long time. I'm self-taught. I taught myself in, I think, 6th grade. And so I've been sewing a long time, and I still to this day have to fix mistakes. I have to pull out the thread. Things just don't work. It's just how it goes. So I'm just going to smooth, that out really, really well, pressing, because again, remember the quilt is kind of like, lumpy and crinkly and all that kind of stuff, and paper is flat. So I really want to make sure that there's a good adherence with all of it. And so I am going to smooth everything out really, really well. And I'll set it aside to dry and to not be disturbed, so it doesn't shift or move. And it doesn't need a long time to dry. Fabric tack dries really quickly. If you use like a tacky glue, that needs a little bit longer. And it's harder to kind of do a thinner coat, but the fabric tack works really well. But there's other, there's fabric fuse. There's other, glues you can use. Just use whatever works for you. When I stitch around this, as I'll show too, you won't see, like I'm only stitching around that quilt on 3 sides because of the pocket is there. But again, you can stitch it how you want to. So here's where I ran into a lot of problems. So when I'm filming, sometimes it's a lot, it's really difficult to show you everything because the camera's right in my face so that you can see all of this. And so it's hard for me to see it. So I literally had to take out my stitching on this like 3 times because I couldn't see to get close enough to the sewing machine or around, because I use my iPad. So imagine that. I'm not even using my phone. So my iPad is very big. Well, compared to like, when you're filming with it. So, sometimes I just don't show everything, and that's just kind of how it is because I'm working with what I got, people. Working with what I got. So anyway, I had to pull out the stitching like 3 different times on this. So my stitching here may not be exactly what it looks like at the end. I don't even remember now. I'm not even sure, but that's how we're going. So, and I'm going incredibly slow because I'm like, I can't see. I don't know where I'm going. So it was really difficult to do this part because I am actually stitching really, really close to the paper. Now you could actually stitch on the paper, if you wanted to, but I've already stitched those panels and I don't really want to compromise the paper with a second set of stitching. I guess it's hard to explain sometimes, but I didn't want that, the look of that. I wanted to stitch on the outside of it. But if you want to stitch on the paper or even stitch down your panels, your paper, all of it at the same time, you can totally do it. I mean, there's a bazillion different ways that you can create journals and make them, and you don't really know if you're going to like it, if it's going to turn out sometimes, especially if you're doing something new, until you've done it. So I had tacked that pocket into place, but then as I got to sewing, it didn't really fit the way that it was. So I just, pulled it back up. That's why I always kind of do, if I'm just tacking something into place that I'm going to sew, I usually just do a light coating of glue so it's easy to kind of just tear it back up if I need to. Because that's very common to have to adjust things, especially fabric, to adjust it because it will pull and move in different ways. And I'm deciding here whether do I want to go to the top of it or the bottom of it. I pulled the thread out so much, though, I actually ended up going over the top of it in the end. I do remember that. And I mean, you can stitch around a journal however many times you want. Sometimes I've done it 3 or 4 times. It depends on your overall look, what you're going for. So I'm just showing here, and it's not perfect. It's not supposed to be perfect. That's not what these type of journals are. I don't even know if any journals are really supposed to be perfect, but mine definitely are not. It's not a look I try to achieve. So I'm showing you here how I just stitched around the 3 sides, but you could totally stitch the side pocket thing. That would be very thick to kind of go through the machine, all of it. But I could have stitched the panel, then folded the pocket over and then stitched it that way, but I didn't. I just folded the pocket over and stitched like in a U shape around the 3 sides, and that was it. And then this is all stitched in, finally. Took me so many times. So you can see how I've ran the stitch along the outside. I didn't run any stitches through the center where the spine is, but you could. Nothing wrong with that. So I love how those turned out. I think they're really super cute. So now I've sped this part up because this is just going to be me folding papers. I tend to print out and kind of match up all my papers of how I think that they're going to be. That could totally change, but that's kind of my way of doing things. I match up different patterns. So I printed stuff out, and now I have gone back and printed the back sides of things and put them in the order that I think that I'm going to have them in. And now I'm folding them. Well, because my journals, the size that they are, kind of make it easy to just fold these papers in half. That's kind of what I end up doing. I just fold them in half for now. Now, as they go to the center, they're going to push out a little bit, but I don't worry about that yet until I'm kind of done doing any embellishing and stuff, and then I'll trim that part down if I need to. So I'm just deciding here, like, where I want everything. I'm going to incorporate authentic ephemera now, and I will do that a lot with, book pages, invoices, envelopes, letters, just all sorts of different things, documents, whatever I have, whatever I think looks good, coloring wise, I will add that sort of stuff in. And then this can still change as I go to create. I will embellish it before I've stitched the signature in. And I think I am kind of basically just doing one signature in each of these journals. I tend to do that a lot unless, I do like a custom journal, and then sometimes I'll do, 2 or 3 signatures in those journals. They're usually more robust a bit. I do a lot more decorating in those. So this envelope here is actually really fragile, which I didn't realize it until I went to, kind of like fold it up. And I need to figure out what to do, but I just kind of move on a lot of times to just go to something else until I can kind of determine what to do, to remedy that, to fix that. And here I'm just deciding, do I want that there? Do I like the way that looks, the envelope? And then I'm toying with that paper there, but I don't actually end up using that one. I think it's concordance, something like that, maybe. So I'm going to add this paper here to the front pocket. I printed a digital on the back of the scrapbook paper, and I'm just kind of working it in. And I'm like, I think I'll tuck it under the little like doily there. And as you see, I'm, kind of going back and forth with each of the journals, but, the premise is the same. I just kind of go through the different papers, kind of line them all up, get them folded, add to it. Sometimes I'll take away, it really just depends on what I end up doing. And you'll see that I incorporated like a lot of florals because the whole entire, journal cover is just a bunch of florals for the most part. I wanted just to incorporate a lot of really, coordinating looking florals inside. So I added a lot of those. So now you'll see I've added eyelets. So I added them to the front of each of the covers. You could also add them to the back if you wanted to. The one with the pocket wouldn't have worked that way. It would have been, too thick, and then it would have hindered, how much of that pocket you could use. So I just did it to the front. And I'm kind of showing you, like, I've done a few things So I'm creating a little pocket here. So I embossed that paper there that I've added, and then I always line paper with book page usually on the back just to kind of reinforce it a little bit, and then I'm gluing it in place. I don't know if I'll stitch it, with the sewing machine or even hand stitching. So I've glued it in place, and then I'll make that decision at some point. So sometimes when you emboss old, vintage paper, and that cream colored page is from, a book, it will sometimes, crack the paper a bit because, it's more fragile than if it were new. And so I'm thinking I should reinforce it a little bit just so it doesn't tear. And it may never tear, but I just thought I should enforce it, it a little bit. So I'm using another fragile paper, but in combination with the glue, it'll make it, a really sturdy page, I think, which I'll double check after it all dries. But I'm just going to lay that over the back of it after I've applied all the glue, and then it should, reinforce this page. And then down the road, if it ever needs to be reinforced or whatever, you can just, glue another piece of paper over it if it needs to. Or something decorative or whatever. I may even still add something, like this would be a great place because of the color of that brown, would be a great place for, like a really pretty authentic, wallpaper, just kind of like torn wallpaper and attached to the front of that. But we'll see. I don't know. I haven't done anything to it yet, so I'm not sure. So I may or may not. But you can see it's really, really fragile. It just, breaks off. So I am just taking off the rest of it. Now, sometimes if that paper wouldn't have been so fragile, I would have just kind of like left some of it and maybe glued some of it down to kind of frame, but it's definitely too fragile for that. It just breaks. But it really ties in with the coloring of the postcard on the opposite side there. So that document, which I believe is like a railroad document, it has the holes at the top, from originally probably being in some sort of binder or whatever. And I contemplate just very briefly, should I just cut those holes out? And I just go for it. And I just go ahead and just do it. Now I don't know what I'm going to do there. If I'm going to attach something there, tie something there, I don't know, but we will see. I will eventually do something. And then you'll just kind of see me kind of, just looking at things, deciding if I want some different things. So a lot of times if I'm kind of deciding something, but I'm not 100% sure, I will like leave it on the page like I did with that music paper. I'll leave it there and then just kind of think about it again if I'm going to create like a pocket. So here I am. I'm going to create a pocket probably with it, and I am going to just attach some thin paper to the back, and this is like a dictionary page. Normally I use my ruler, but don't think I could find it immediately, but I'll find it eventually, and then I'll use my ruler. But, that book page is really thin, so it tears really easily. So what I'll do here is I'll tack it in place. I'll use some glue, and then I'll decide later if I want to stitch it in place. So you're going to see, I hesitate here because that, on this digital, that little portion up there in the corner, it just was so dark. I think it was like an old envelope or something, an image of an old envelope. So I'm going to change that. Just for the overall aesthetics of the journal, it's just, I need to change that. So I'm going to use this piece here and I'm just going to glue it. And sometimes if you try to do this and you use a really thin piece of like copy paper, you know, it kind of makes your page a little bit weird because, you know, then it's really thick. But I printed this out on a thicker paper, so this is going to be fine. You're still going to notice that there's a little bit more bulk here, but it's not a lot. You know, this is just a scrapbook paper. It's not cardstock or anything. So, you know, it'll blend somewhat seamlessly. And to kind of make it look like it was always there, I just went over that tape with, you know, tape that I made using, you know, alcohol inks. And I think it turned out really cool. I really, really like the way that looks. Once I've got it all trimmed up, you'll see here in a second. I think it looks really good. And it feels more like authentic and like it goes with the whole journal as opposed to that really just dark color that was there before. It just didn't really seem to fit in this particular instance. So I'm just going to ink because, you know, when you cut, you know, fresh new paper, you get that like white core. And so I'm just kind of inking a little bit. That's totally optional. Just kind of the overall look I'm going for. And then I created a flip out with another envelope. So I just folded it up to create a pocket. And you'll see it's catching. I've got a, you know, where the, oh gosh, what do you call, like where it folds or whatever is not completely adhered down. So I'm just adding a little bit of glue there. The flap. So there's a pocket there. It flips open. I just used age tape, you know, on the front and the back of it. And then there's a pocket, you know, at the top there too. So I'm just choosing a tag or what I think might go there. And then I just kind of move on. You know, this is kind of how I create. I just kind of move all around and, you know, make decisions and then go back to them. On this backside here, I put this telegram. I thought that looked really cute. So here's a telegram for the front of this one. And because it's fragile, you know, I've put the tape there, but I'm kind of thinking of making it like a little tuck spot. But if I do that, I need to reinforce the telegram paper itself because it's thin. So I'm obviously still thinking about it, and then I move on. And I'm thinking about where am I going to put pockets in this? So if I'm not 100% sure, again, I just stick it there and then, you know, I move on. So I'm going to add a little piece of tape here to the edge, just because it's a thinner page. And it looks decorative too. You know, it looks really neat. But I think I'm about done showing you, you know, part 2. And I'll work on these a little bit more. You know, and you can ask me any questions below or if there's something I didn't show that you want to see. But I'll continue on. I'll kind of, you know, just kind of gauge and look, you know, and see everything. Here's this fragile envelope. And what I ended up doing, I'll talk about that real quick, is I just printed out an image onto tracing paper and then I attached that. And I think that's going to keep that reinforced. So I think that'll be really good. But anyway, I hope you will join me for part 3. If you have any questions, feel free to put them below and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks everybody. Bye-bye.